So I welcome Mr. Noam Chomsky, who requires no introduction whatsoever. His name is an ambassador for all who think, all who have managed to think and to ponder, and all those who have managed to acquire a conscious state of wisdom. So I welcome Mr. Noam Chomsky on our program, All That Matters at the Gray Lounge. I thank you very much, Mr. Chomsky, for joining us. And I hope that you are in good health and good condition, because that's what we pray for all the time. Since the time we got to know that we are coming on a podcast, I have been noticing all your podcasts, and I've been noticing how difficult it is for you to take time out. And I thank you for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you very much. It's my privilege. Glad to be with you. Let me see if I can get the sound proper. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, we're just getting the recording mechanism activated, so it's going to take just a couple of minutes. In the meanwhile, what we can I can run through the format of the program for you. We could it's going to be very simple. I would first initially introduce the program for just a couple of minutes, and then bring you and our friend here, Sahil Adeem, as our members of the podcast for discussions. And then once I introduce both the guests, then there are just 4 questions that we have for you. I will first now, at the moment, I will just let you know the questions so that you know what we're talking about. So that you know what the questions would be. The first question that I have is about. I mean, I'm just going to go to the question that is it not evident that now, in the wake of things currently going on, the United States hegemony is now on the verge of a collapse, and this economic collapse of United States would probably take all the allies under the rubble, and I would want your opinion on that. Of course, you could say whatever. And then the other question that we have, where I would involve our guest Sahil, is about Palestine and the Israel issue.
Yeah.
Your opinion on that, and
you'll put the questions in the chat box.
Yes, we will do that. We will do that. I will put the questions there. And then there's another question about the role of religious leaders that mankind has witnessed over the past few centuries that we know of, that we have recorded history of. And the third and the fourth and final question is that we recently got to know about your view regarding the matter where Imran Khan, the former Prime Minister of Pakistan, in his speeches publicly stated, I would not say alleged, but stated that United States government had involvement in bringing his government down. And we heard your opinion on that. So we just wanted to have just a quick discussion on that chapter, also your views on that. And these are the 4 questions that I have. And additionally, if there's something that you would want to add, of course, we would be honored to have your opinion on that. And also during the discussions, if something arises into another leading question, of course, we would take that as quickly as possible so that we do not waste much time of yours.
Okay, let's get going.
Okay, perfect. Okay, we are just getting the recording mechanism on.
Mr. Chomsky, while I have you, and he's working on his camera, I just had a quick question.
Okay, well, I'm waiting. You're typing the question?
Yeah, he's typing the question while we speak. I just wanted to, because ever since I have known Dr. Finkelstein, I've always wanted to know firsthand, because I'm like probably the biggest fan of this guy and the way he's actually placed himself in the whole arena of what's going on there. But and the kind of problems he's gone through. I just wanted to know, would anyone go through the kind of problems Norman went through as a professor? Oh, he ultimately did become a professor, right? As an academic, talking about Israel, do you think any man would just go through that, or maybe he went a little too out of bounds at some level, or you think he just got unlucky?
Norman Finkelstein?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to know if any man in his shoes would have gotten through the kind of problems that he went through.
What kind of problems?
Well, in his professorship, in his the kind of the way people dealt with him, especially Dershowitz and the whole clan, and
I mean, he wrote a book in which he showed that Dershowitz's claims about Israel were completely false, mostly fabrications, other
of John Peterson, yeah,
for atrocities. Dershowitz understood that he couldn't possibly answer, so he turned to try to destroy the book. First, he threatened the publisher. It was a small publisher. Threatened the publishers with all kind of lawsuits, down to the level of writing to assistants who were working there, saying big law firms would attack them and so on. And finally, the publisher withdrew. It couldn't withstand all these attacks. So on my suggestion, Finkelstein sent the book to a larger publisher, the University of California Press. And Dershowitz tried very hard to get the University of California to even approach the governor of California to try to get him to intercede to suppress the book. Well, they didn't back down. They said, we don't care about your threats. And so they published the book, at which point Dershowitz shifted to trying to destroy Finkelstein. He was approved for tenure at his university. Dershowitz launched a huge campaign to the trustees, to the faculty, to get them to deny him his tenure, and all kind of threats and inducements. All of this is in an effort just to prevent the book from appearing and exposing him what he had done. Well, he did succeed in blocking the tenure promotion.
Yeah, so that's yeah, but on the flip side, actually, that put Norman on a very globally a way bigger figure than he could have been if Dershowitz was not there. It was like a silver lining in all of that. I actually was always figuring out because as the Pakistani youth and a lot of people actually I've actually spoken to in Toronto. I used to live in Toronto, and they actually used to just throw in the Jewish card that this is what the Dershowitz just lobbying, and he's just pro-Israel and all of that. And I was thinking maybe it's not all of that. Maybe it's just pure narcissism on one man's part. Maybe it has nothing to do with the Jewish lobby or a vested interest or a behind the camera, some sort of a bigger game. Maybe it's just a man-to-man thing. Maybe Dershowitz was just a classic narcissist who.
It's basically personal. Dershowitz doesn't want to be exposed as a fraud and a liar. He's very, he even writes books defending himself from somebody's criticism. He's, I wouldn't say, I don't know if it's narcissism. He's trying to establish himself. He's a media personality, a Harvard professor of law, presents himself as a very distinguished figure. doesn't want to be exposed. But of course, he's an extreme apologist for Israel, just extraordinary. So it's a mixture. But it's not Jewish backed, it's him.
Mm-hmm. But I never understood is that whenever there is a left-wing Jewish lawyer or any statesman, they're way more into the Israel game than the right-wingers that you see. It's kind of a surprising that these people don't really claim to know the religious doctrine and have never read the Torah. They do not really know the first thing about the reason why the Orthodox Jew would want Israel, but they're way more passionate about the game of Israel or the state of Israel.
He himself has a fairly intense Jewish background. I think he probably went to yeshiva, but I don't know what's the difference really. This is a single person who's a grotesque apologist for Israel, very concerned with his own position and image. He likes to present himself as a great civil libertarian who's fighting the battle of justice and freedom. And he, as I say, he has a media image of that kind. He's invited to national public radio to talk about civil rights issues. And he simply doesn't want to be exposed as a liar and a fraud and a vulgar apologist for crimes. That's all that's involved. He happens to be effective because he has resources, threats that he can impose and so on. But I don't think he deserves this much attention, frankly.
Yeah, I agree. But this is not just him. There's so many that you see news anchors and people are not even qualified to talk about Israel. But coming back to my the heart of my question is that the rest of the world actually starts to believe that this is all Israel backing these kind of people up, even though it's not Israel every time. This is just their personal.
I can't hear you. Do you want me to go on to the questions that are typed?
Just one last question. I just typed that in about the 5 vetoes. I just typed the last question. I never got the sense of why the world doesn't.
Why isn't there a movement against the veto powers? How does that work with so many people of the world? The veto power, the UN was established primarily under US initiative, but it was basically the victors in World War II. China was brought in because China was then, was Chiang Kai-shek's China, the Kuomintang, was an ally of the United States. So the United States brought China in. And it was set up so that they would protect themselves. That's the UN. There's no way for other power, maybe the great majority of the world doesn't like it, but there's nothing they can do about it. How are they going to change the UN to eliminate veto powers? If they did, the 5 countries that have vetoes would just pull out of the UN. I mean, it's kind of like there is a treaty for the prevention of production of nuclear weapons. It's an official treaty. It's in force, signed by, I think, about 120 countries. The nuclear power simply refused to abide by it.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it?
Well, there are hundreds of countries who had all the time to start a movement or resistance that, this lopsidedness should not work for long enough. I mean, this just does not make sense to any man who can think that 5 people can just veto anything, even if it makes perfect sense, out of the table. I mean,
certainly unjust, but what are you going to do about it? I mean, if the United States decides not to accept a world court judgment, as it did, What are you going to do?
Well,
If
somebody's
Pakistan,
got to start somewhere, right?
I mean, take Pakistan.
Yeah.
Pakistan developed nuclear weapons in violation of international law, happened to be supported by the United States. The United States basically gave it a green light for its own reasons. But what is anyone going to do about it? It would have to be changed within Pakistan. Similarly, if the United States, or take right now Russia, Russia is violating the UN Charter by invading Ukraine. Can you do anything about it? Well,
you certainly can start to do something about it as part making up blocks. And well, I you know what I'm amazed about it, the fact that nothing was even initiated against this 5 veto ship. Never. It was never even on the table for discussion. It's that's the kind of thing that appalls a guy like me.
It's been on the table for discussion for decades, but the world is run by the powerful. And the only way to change that is by undermining the basis of their power. In the case of the great powers, nuclear wielding powers, the veto powers, has to be done from within.
Within the United States, or within Russia, or within these 5 countries? That's what you're saying?
There's no other way.
Yeah.
When Britain was ruling the waves, how could you change that? Either by war or internally within Britain. I mean, you know, there's a tremendous amount of injustice in the world, but you have to look at its structure and ask on what it's based and see if we can undermine the basis for the illegitimate power. We can talk about it, but, you know, say how unjust it is, but that doesn't do anything any more than.
I'm sorry.
Take internal repression. So, for example, there's plenty of internal repression in Pakistan. Mm-hmm. Can anybody do anything about it? Only inside Pakistan.
Well, you don't see that kind of even a talk on U.S. television or in the universities. Students don't, they naturally accept the fact that we have a veto, even though everyone with any kind of a common sense would know by sheer empathy.
Well, we can question it, but we are talking about systems of power. It's like saying, I don't like the mafia. Okay. I don't like criminal gangs. Okay, so we agree we don't like criminal gangs. Now what? If you tried to introduce new vetoes membership into the UN, the 5 veto countries that have the veto power would simply veto it.
Yeah, but you know what? If the very movement is about the veto ship, then naturally it would not make sense to veto it.
It's not legitimate, but they have the force. It's like saying, I don't think that fossil fuel corporations should be producing poisons that are destroying the atmosphere. Okay, I just said it. Now what? Can I tell them you shouldn't be doing that? Stop? Of course not. You have to have mechanisms that will change it. I mean, there are such mechanisms, but they have to be put into play. In this case, just saying, I'd like to get rid of the veto is fine. We said it. Now, what makes them stop the veto? What makes them give up nuclear weapons? In fact, if you look back in past years, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, there were major efforts on the part of the entire global South, non-aligned movement, G77, to try to create a new international economic order, which would take into consideration the needs of the former colonized powers, the great majority of the world, the new international information order, which would allow them to break the monopoly of the imperial powers. Many important things were done. Fine statesmen were involved, African, Indian, Latin American. They were simply beaten down by greater power, the power of the imperial states. Well, that can't be changed by just talking about it. In fact, it was quite serious. Take Africa. Africa has a hideous history under European domination. I don't have to go through that. But in the 1950s, there were steps towards decolonization. The major country in Africa is the Congo. Huge country, rich resources, lots of potential, could be one of the richest countries in the world, could have led Africa to development. Well, it was under Belgian rule, it was devastated, hideous crimes. But in 1960, it did formally become independent, had a very important leader, forward-looking, charismatic, great ideas, a lot of public appeal, Patrice Lumumba. So what happened? Well, first the CIA put out a hit to assassinate him, but they were beaten by Belgian intelligence, which managed to assassinate him first. Then Belgium, the United States, other European powers supported a murderous kleptomaniac, Mobutu, who robbed and destroyed the country and enriched himself. Now Congo's a total wreck. Millions of people are being killed while multinational corporations are extracting the minerals that you use in your iPhone and so on. It's beyond unjust. It's a major crime. So we can talk about it. Can we do something about it? Well, we can try, but not just by like that, not just by saying, why don't we do this? It takes education, organization, activism, major issues. That's true, and it takes something as simple as, not seems simple, as Iranian nuclear programs. The United States and Israel want to block them. There's an easy way to do that. Establish a nuclear weapons-free zone in the Middle East. That would end Iranian nuclear problem, if there is any. Everyone's in favor of it. Iran's in favor of it. The Arab states are in favor of it. G77, the global south, is in favor. Europe's in favor. So why doesn't it happen? Because the US vetoes it.
Yeah, that's exactly why I want to think
you
of.
can't even talk about this. Okay, so I can give speeches about it, write articles about it. I don't get killed. It's a free country, but it can't reach the mainstream agenda without organization, kind of activism, that'll overcome concentrated power. That's the way the world works.
Well, I still think, I don't want to seem like a pessimist, but you think there is still...
Better write it down.
Yeah, here you go. I just typed it. I just wanted to know that there's so much of youth that is actually tuned into my content. And you have 100 years on the planet now. I just want your take on what is the 2 or 1 thing that you would tell them never to do, those mistakes, people in their 20s. And let me just rephrase it. Given a time machine, what is the one thing that you would do differently if you had to do it all over?
do the same things, but more diligently, more actively. You first have to free yourself of the illusions created by propaganda, doctrinal systems. You have to break through their constraints, then bring along, organize larger groups of people to engage with you. Finally, you can get some results. There have been achievements this way. So, for example, much of the world is much more civilized than it was 50 or 60 years ago. There are lots of issues of human rights, women's rights, minority rights, opposition to aggression, far more advanced than they were 50 and 60 years ago. Didn't come about by magic, came about by hard, dedicated work. There are periods of regression. There's progress. That's the way human society proceeds. But there's no secrets. There's no magic keys. It's just hard, honest, diligent work in Pakistan and everywhere else. There are no magic solutions. Don't look for them.
What is the one mistake that everybody made? You think it's the everybody falls prey to the delusional fascination?
Well, there certainly are many cases in Pakistan and throughout the world where the U.S. government has used its power, its overwhelming power, to intervene, to overthrow governments, carry out subversion, invade, all sorts of things. It's happened in Pakistan as well. Did it happen this time in the case of Imran Khan? Maybe, but I don't know if it's certainly possible. But
there was an article written in our news, quoting you directly, that Mr. Chomsky has actually found no legitimate reason or substantial evidence that America.
I have not seen. I mean, as I said, it's perfectly plausible. It's happened many times, but you need evidence. And I have not seen any substantial evidence in this case. It wouldn't surprise me if there is evidence, but that's
I'm not a guy who actually, is for all of these kind of claims. But would you not think that even if there is no visible or apparent intervention, America is still intervening?
I'm sorry, you better write it down. I cannot hear what you're saying. Only little bits of what you're saying.
I'm just saying, regardless of what Imran Khan has to say, U.S. intervention is as evident as anything else.
U.S. intervenes all over the place.
Yeah.
But that's not enough to prove that that's what happened in this case. For each case, you have to find evidence. The fact that it happens in other cases doesn't prove it.
Well, but that still, there is no evidence against it. And we know the pattern the United States has followed for the last 70 years of our country. Yeah. So it's not like...
Very, very powerful, done a lot of intervention, a lot of violence, a lot of aggression, violation of international law, all sorts of crimes. But that is not enough to show that that's what happened in this case. To show in a particular case, any particular case, you need evidence, not the fact that it happened somewhere else.
Yeah, I agree. I just don't know why the evidence is just talked about and not shown or published somewhere. So it's let me just get Xaryab in, because he's got those questions that are typed for you, the original purpose of the program, because he's having some technical difficulties. Mr. Chomsky, you have no idea the kind of love that I have for you and the kind of honor I feel by being just in your presence. I know you can't hear me properly, but it's quite an honor. You have no idea the kind of fulfillment I'm getting by just being in the same screen as Mr. Noam Chomsky. Thank you so much. I'll just you're a torch for people like me and millions of people like me. And just may God give you more health and then more wisdom to share to anyone and everyone who wants it. Thank you so much.
Very pleased to have a chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Sir.
Okay.
Okay, first of all, thank you very much for having us together. And yeah, thank you very much for joining us. And I'm quickly going to move to the questions. There are only 4 questions for us for this podcast, and I hope to see you again on a podcast, because people in Pakistan are showing an overwhelming response, knowing that Mr. Chomsky is honoring us with his presence. So the first question that I have is, do you see the U.S. Hegemony collapsing and taking down its allies with it? And in the wake of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, Russia might peg its currency with yuan, and it's already moved to gold. So how do you see the economical shift on the global scale?
Well, the invasion of Ukraine, which is, of course, criminal aggression, has had already a number of major consequences for world order. One thing is it has strengthened U.S. dominance and hegemony. President Putin carried out not only a criminal action, but a very stupid one. He gave the United States its fondest wish on a silver platter. He handed Europe over to the United States. Throughout the whole Cold War, there's been a question about the status of Europe. Will it become an independent force in world affairs, as it certainly can, given its population, its resources, education, and so on? But will it be an independent force, or will it be subordinate to the United States? That has been a major issue since the end of the Second World War. There were statesmen like Charles de Gaulle, who called for an independent Europe, as he put it, from the Atlantic to the Urals, incorporating Russia, which would, with no military alliances. That was carried forward to a certain extent in Germany by what was called Ostpolitik, accommodations with the East, Willy Brandt, others. After the Soviet Union collapsed, Mikhail Gorbachev put forth an even broader picture, called a common European home, as he put it, from Lisbon to Vladivostok, but with no military alliances, just commercial, cultural relations. That would be very advantageous to Europe for all sorts of reasons, commercial, cultural, security, and so on. The United States, in the same years, right after the fall of the Soviet Union, had a rather similar proposal. It was called Partnership for Peace. The Partnership for Peace could have brought together the countries of Europe and Asia. NATO was not eliminated, but it was marginalized. Countries could join the Partnership for Peace without being members of NATO. So it was not too dissimilar from Gorbachev's proposal. That was a possibility. President Clinton undermined it by inviting first so-called Visegrad countries, Poland, Romania, Czechoslovakia, inviting them into NATO. That was in violation of firm promises made by his predecessor, George Bush, first Bush, that NATO would not expand. He did it mainly for domestic political reasons, Polish vote and so on. George W. Bush, the second Bush, just opened the door, even offered Ukraine invited Ukraine to join. Well, it was understood by the entire US political class and diplomatic corps, heads of the CIA and others, that inviting Ukraine into NATO is something no Russian leader would ever tolerate. You can see exactly why. If you look at a topographical map, Russia has no defenses. Just look at Operation Barbarossa, the German invasion of Russia went right through Ukraine all the way up to Moscow. So no Russian leader was ever going to accept this. Well, that's the end result of Putin's invasion is to drive Europe into the hands of the United States. Now, the idea of a common European home is gone. Europe is completely subordinate to the United States within the NATO framework. Well, that's greatly increases US power. Now, what's shaping up after this is a world in which China is slowly, carefully expanding its development and loan programs. Pakistan's included, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative. It spreads into Africa, South Pacific. And just today in the New York Times, you can read a lament about how these Chinese programs are pushing the United States out of the South Pacific by just, you can't compete with development programs by saying, I'll send you more arms. That doesn't work. So China's slowly extending its power. Now Russia will probably join it as a junior partner. Russia's a fading kleptocracy, but it has a huge store of minerals and all kinds of natural resources. The idea of pegging the currency, which you brought up, that's of some significance. They're probably, Europe, if it was independent, could have established the euro as a foundation of international trade and commerce, but that would require an independent Europe there. And now Putin's closed off that option, at least for now. Most of the global South is not joining the United States and Europe in its war with Russia. You take a look at the sanctions map, they're not part of the sanctions. Much of the third world, the global South, condemns the invasion of Ukraine, but says, I don't understand what you people are upset about. This is what you do to us all the time. So what's new? Now there's another war criminal along with you. They're just not taking part. They're maintaining open relations with China, with Russia. In fact, it's kind of odd to read it. Just yesterday, I read a report in the Hindustan Times condemning Pakistan for keeping its relations open with Russia, which is exactly what India does. So that's, but this is basically the global South is saying, this is your fight, not ours. We're going to keep relations open with Russia and China while deploring the invasion. Just another crime of the kind that you carry out all the time. Well, that's the world that's shaping up. The major confrontation, I think, will be between the United States and China. That's been made very clear in US policy, even just a couple of days ago when Secretary of State Anthony Blinken was in Asia. He was setting up what's called the Indo-Pacific system to try to create what they're quite openly doing. It's not secret, is to encircle China. That's the phrase that's used. to encircle China with sentinel states, South Korea, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, heavily armed, the armaments aimed at China, backed by a huge fleet of nuclear submarines, US nuclear submarines, which a single submarine, one, is capable of destroying maybe 200 cities anywhere in the world. But they're not powerful enough, so they're being replaced by more powerful ones. All of this aimed at China. And it's called defense against China. The defense against China is not off the coast of California, it's off the coast of China. And the ideas, Blinken said just a couple of days ago, China is challenging US dominance in Asia, and that can't be tolerated. That's aggression, can't confront US, but China is not intimidated. It's not like Europe.
Just yesterday, Chinese aircrafts were performing their exercises close to the Taiwan border. So China is not afraid anymore. That's pretty obvious.
That's the problem. When the United States gives orders, Europe follows them, even if it doesn't like it. So, for example, when the US imposes sanctions on Iran after pulling out of the joint agreement, Europe is outraged, doesn't like it, but they keep to the sanctions because they don't want to offend the United States. But China isn't like that. They are not intimidated. They go their own way.
But don't you think
real problem to the United States?
Don't you think that with the going with the United States again into another proxy war, with the Nord Stream 2 cut off, the backlash of the economic backlash on Germany after the Brexit matter, because now after Brexit, EU is basically banking on countries like Germany, and with this Nord Stream 2 cut off, Germany would probably not sustain economically this another proxy war that the United States want the NATO to get into.
Well, I don't think there'll be a war between NATO and China. There could be.
No, with NATO and Ukraine.
Could be the United States and China. Could happen. There are flashpoints. If simply imagine that the United States was surrounded by highly armed states backed by a huge military alliance, which was aimed at the United States. Well, they wouldn't tolerate it.
Yeah.
But we expect China to tolerate it.
Yeah. But if the US...
They're reacting in a very constrained way. They're not reacting militarily. They're acting by expanding their loan and development system, which the US has no way to counter. So it's you can't counter it by force.
See, $54 billion sent by the United States for this Ukraine conflict, while the people of the United States really didn't like that concept.
Part of that, I think, is justified as support for a country that's defending itself against aggression. But part of it goes way beyond that. In fact, official US policy, announced, is to fight the war in order to harm Russia and to ensure.
Yeah, well, that's the motive.
Okay, it's an open proxy war.
So don't you think that with this economic drain that the United States wants itself to go into for no particular reason now, noticing that China is about to take over this on an economic level. Now, this is just the dying wishes of this United States ballooned economy?
Neither the United States nor Russia is a saint. They're both acting in their own power interests, just
That's
like
true.
Pakistan does in its own more limited domain. You
Mhm.
don't expect states to be Mahatma Gandhi.
Yeah, true,
Right.
true.
They
So
act in their own power interests.
this is a question for which I would request another day, another time. So I would quickly move to the other question,
Yeah.
which is mainly the question of my interest, and that is question 2, which is in the text you would see that the Israel-Palestine matter. Why isn't the world moved, despite the visible atrocities and war crimes with colossal loss of human life that we see for so many years? Now, what do you think is the reason? I mean, there has to have some sort of a conscience that that anybody or everybody has to show. Now, where is that conscience collectively as mankind?
If you're talking about individuals, those who are aware of it are outraged. Most are not aware because it's not reported, or it's reported somehow in the margins, or the way it's reported is Israel's defending itself against Palestinian terrorists. So your conscience can't act unless you're aware of what is happening. So the first step, as always, is to tear away the veil of propaganda and deceit. That's happened to a large extent. So in the United States, which is the most important country, the United States is the only country, as far as I know, that recognizes and supports Israel's illegal annexations of the Syrian Golan Heights and Greater Jerusalem in violation of Security Council orders. Well, that's the American government. If you look at the American population, opinions changing. Go back 10 or 20 years, Israel was the darling of the liberal community.
But don't you think these individuals go up to become and policymakers? Don't you think that the youth of the current era is the policymaker of tomorrow? So do you see a solution coming out in the next 10 to 15, 20 years, maybe?
Public opinion is shifting. The support for Israel now comes from the evangelical church, the far right, military elements. It used to come from liberal democracies in support. That's changed. It hasn't yet changed policy, but public opinion can change policy. It has to, we don't live in totalitarian societies. Can't throw people in jail who object. So it is possible, as in the past, to bring about changes in policy. Well, Europe could do things. So, for example, Europe's position right now is to complain when Israel carries out crimes, complain, and rebuild what Israel destroys. At the same time, Europe invites Israel into the European system as a welcome member. Doesn't have to, can go beyond that. It can carry out, say, boycotts of anything in the occupied territories. Formally,
but sir, see, in this current conflict, jihadis were trained in Israel and sent to Ukraine to fight against Russia. I mean, what sort of a paradoxical mindset that this current EU has?
The paradoxical mindset that constitutes 100% of human history. Okay, so yes, it's unpleasant. It's true, it shouldn't happen, but that's the way history develops. And the way to counter it is straightforward. It's hard. It's to eliminate free people from the control of the propaganda systems, organize them, get them to act, and you can change things. There's
but
no
see,
other way.
you,
But there's no point bemoaning the paradox, which is the way the world has always worked.
I agree. But see, Germany is still apologetic for the Holocaust, and that's why they are still favoring this whole concept of Israel occupation, because they're still apologizing for what Hitler had done to the Jews. Now, this has to end at some place, and until Germany does that, the whole EU would never change its stance.
It's not just Hitler. That was the worst, but there's a long 1,000-year history of intense anti-Semitism, repression of Jews. Hitler consummated it. So yes, and it's not as bad in the Muslim world, but there's been repression too. So yes, that can't be just forgotten, but it doesn't in any way justify what Israel's doing today. I should say that that's not the only case in history. Slavery is one of the worst crimes and atrocities in human history, carried out by Europe and the United States. The slaughter of the people of the Western Hemisphere, tens of millions were slaughtered by the European invasion. In the United States, probably 90% were slaughtered. What's now the United States. These are major crimes. Well, we should recognize them, understand them, try to compensate to what extent we can, but it's not a justification of today's crimes.
True. So, okay, sir, I'm going to move to my next question, which is my favorite question. And the question is that in the recorded history of mankind so far, aside from religious leaders, mankind has never seen any leadership that has managed to influence masses on any particular cause.
Unfortunately, that's not true. Okay. You mentioned Hitler. Hitler organized Germany in almost total support, enormous support for Hitler's policies of destroying the Jews, conquering Russia, just killing 30 million Slavs so that Germany could have more Lebensraum. Germany was totally supportive of that. And remember, in the 1920s, Germany was absolutely at the peak of European civilization. It was the most advanced country in the sciences, the arts, the humanities. You wanted to be a philosopher, artist, science, physicist, you went to Germany. Was regarded as a model of democracy.
True.
That was Germany in the 1920s. True. 10 years later, Germany was at the absolute depths of
but that is more of a regime. Don't you agree?
But that leadership has managed to influence masses
by force
ways. Okay. There have been many improvements in human society. Civilization has advanced, didn't come from leaders. It came from the ground. Activism, abolition, women's rights, opposition to wars, doesn't come from leadership. It comes from popular mass opposition. I mean, it's not 100% the case, but it's overwhelmingly true.
True, but why? But do you think that, you see, if in comparison to all the religious leaders of recorded mankind history, this in comparison is nothing?
Well, religious leaders have been among the worst in leading the way to major atrocities and the worst crimes in history, usually with the support of religious leaders. There are a few exceptions on the margins. So they're not exempt from this. It comes down to the same thing. Those with power, maybe even religious leaders who have power, are going to tend to use it for their own purposes. It's the history of the Catholic Church is a good illustration. When the Emperor Constantine of Rome, 4th century, took Christianity, which means Catholic religion, took it as the official religion of the Roman Empire, the Catholic Church became a leader in violent repression, wars, atrocities, went on for thousands of years, literally, went on until Pope John the 23rd in 1962 tried to return the church to the Gospels. Liberation theology, it was called. It was smashed by force. The United States Army publicly takes pride in having led the way to destroy liberation theology. Church leaders were murdered, assassinated, archbishops, intellectuals who were following the Gospels, basically, which was not tolerated. And I should say, it's a mixed story. So there was mass popular support for it, which made a big difference, but it was not coming from the top hierarchy.
Yeah, in the past century, don't you think that this leadership concept has diminished and there is no global leadership left anymore?
Or drop the phrase anymore. When was there?
I mean, if we look at the religious leaders.
Don't look to leaders for salvation. There are exceptions, but typically the leaders are people who got to the leadership position by supporting concentrated power.
Yes.
And they tend to work in its interests.
Yes.
There are rare exceptions, but not many. When there are exceptions, they're thrown out, like Allende in Chile or Lumumba, Congo. But the power systems protect themselves, not a big surprise. Change comes from the mass of the population, which is organized to overcome illegitimate authority, its crimes, and so on.
So your advice would be to not look for leadership, but to bring the revolution within.
Change, revolution, reform, whatever you want to call it. A lot of the changes are very significant. So, slavery was eliminated by an abolitionist movement, which took a major war to do it. But women's rights have been enormously improved.
I have to agree with you on this, that change has to come within, or just like Mahatma Gandhi said, be the change you want to see in the world, right? So it has to start from the person within.
And as Mahatma Gandhi did, organization, his Salt March, for example, his boycott of British groups, these were popular activism. That's what led to a not very pretty outcome for Southeast Asia, but at least the end of the British rule. And that's a big change. British rule in South Asia, and India, was horrific. Britain suppressed the record for a long time. It's just coming out. In fact, here's a book that just appeared, which is causing a big sensation in England. It's about the hideous record of British imperialism, which is just becoming known to the British. They've suppressed it for centuries. Okay, that's how progress is made.
True. Sir, one last thing, and then and then we will request for some other time, some other day of your convenience. This is one last thing that I want to add before we come to an end. We discussed earlier, but I just want to your opinion on this. Imran Khan is adamant and is continuously in every speech saying that the United States government and people in the US, the people with power, toppled his government. And I have to add one thing here from my part, is that from the assassination of Bhutto to the murder of General Zia to the daughter of Bhutto, we know, we see, and we can clearly state that yes, United States intervention in more than 18 to 20 countries is very evident. But what is the difference between this time Imran Khan's allegation to the previous times that are kind of proven?
It's perfectly true that the United States has intervened all over the world. And I mentioned Allende and Chile and the Congo, could have mentioned many others. It may be the case that in this case too, the US was involved in undermining the Khan government, but you need evidence. You can't say because it's happened elsewhere, it happened here. And maybe there is evidence, certainly plausible. I haven't seen it if there is. So
they're not showing the evidence. The letter, they are still keeping it confidential.
You can't have an opinion. My opinion is it's plausible.
But, okay. Because the prevalent news, for some reason, there's a news flourishing in Pakistan that Mr. Chomsky is of the opinion that Imran Khan's allegations are baseless.
No, I didn't say that. I said they haven't been proved.
Okay. Because
they're very plausible, but they haven't been demonstrated. If they are, perfectly happy to accept them. It's normal US behavior. Cases where it has been demonstrated, I speak, write, organize about it all the time.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much for your time. It has been utterly overwhelming for me to have you on board this podcast. And everybody in Pakistan has been looking forward to this because we kind of publicized, advertised it a bit, and people were anxiously waiting. And so was I personally. I wish you very, very best of health. And I wish to see you one more time at any convenient time of yours to discuss the Russia-Ukraine conflict in depth.
Good, that'll be fine. Very happy to have a chance to talk to you.
Thank you very much, sir. Have a good day.